Right now. Just give it a second. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by Gene Epstein once again. And Gene, why don't you give us the broad strokes of what we're getting into today? I thought I was going to do round two of an interview, and he sent me 26 slides, and I said, all right, it's a Gene takeover. Let's go. So give us the introduction. What are we doing today?
You'll be asking your perceptive questions, Rob, but of course, there was just a couple of brief preliminaries. I hope that this time around you've emptied your bladder, because
I will for sure need a bathroom break, but I'm okay for now.
You've got a weak bladder, Rob. I'm 81. I had to wait. Those fans who saw the previous one must have been pretty offended that Rob kept me waiting while they took a bathroom break. I'm only grateful that he wasn't afflicted with diarrhea, but in fact, that segues into the theme of this discussion that we're about to have, which is the economic diarrhea, so to speak. I'm sorry, let's avoid vulgarity. Just all
it's
of
a
the
safe
myths.
space for vulgarity. It's okay.
What?
You're not going to offend my audience. You're more than welcome to use whatever. It's not NPR. You can hang loose.
The economic diarrhea that's been emanating from so many, and as a matter of fact, just yesterday evening, everybody went wild from something from a journalist named Greg Ip from the Wall Street Journal, whom I knew from years back. He writes for the Wall Street Journal, and he posted these charts showing that labor is being screwed. And I just briefly wrote, because I didn't have much time, these charts are bogus, are misleading. And coincidentally, I'm about to appear on the Run Your Mouth podcast the following day to explain why. We'll mention him.
This is the best place to reach the masses to issue a correction. So we're happy to have you here.
Well, that's for sure. And Robin, before we begin, I want to say that you and Dave really hit the peak just a couple of hours ago with me, when you were making the simple point that the Epstein story is worth investigating. It's a similar sort of thing. I mean, to what I'm going to say. In other words, I guess if there weren't so many fools out there, then you and Dave would have so much less to talk about. And in my case, the same thing. I mean, they were all saying, well, case closed. I mean, they're redacting things. They won't give up the files, So there's evidence that of crime doing. You want to call a halt? Let's talk about Bunny. I mean, this is just crazy. And you guys, of course, were putting it so well, a voice of reason. But of course, it's almost depressing that you have to spend an hour on this, simply pointing out to these people, these fools from the media, that we don't know enough to know whether crimes have been committed, and we should know enough to know. That's all you guys were saying, and brilliantly doing it with the usual levity, and I hope to be able to do the same thing about economic data. So let's proceed, Rob, with my first display.
To give us the pitch of the theme. What are we debunking here, and what are we proving?
Guess what? Okay. I should put a finer point on it instead of just calling it diarrhea. Instead of just
I'm okay with that too. That's a topic I might be more acquainted with and prepared to speak with an expertise.
I should explain what kind of diarrhea it is. That even at the Wall Street Journal, most recently, even among free marketeers, even among many libertarians, there is a belief that the official data tell us that labor is getting screwed. The broad data show that labor is getting screwed and that corporate profits are at unseemly highs, unseemly peaks. And this is coming from academic economists from Harvard, all over the place. Even Bob Murphy tends to believe it, if you heard of him. great libertarian economist, and it's simply based on violating the simple rules of Econ 101. It's simply based on not reading the instructions from the most official source, the government, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which provides a glossary and an explanation of how the data work.
So just very quick question, just to make sure that we're on the same page here. Are you challenging the idea that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? Or are we speaking about?
I would. In a way that becomes a broader question. I'm talking about, of course, what labor is getting paid, and I'm talking about what profits are being made by the most important corporate sector of all, the non-financial corporate sector. If you're talking in broad brush strokes, then I will tell you that there's a book you should read, which you probably haven't, which shows that the distribution of income, once you include all welfare payments, which no source does, especially the Census Bureau, do not include all welfare payments. And once you include all taxes on the rich, then the distribution of income, once you factor in all income from welfare, from government, from the after-tax income of the rich, that in fact the distribution of income is slightly more equal than it was 70 years ago.
Okay, and then just to put one more just broad stroke on it, do you think that the general reason that people tend to walk around with the gripe that, hey, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting screwed is that people are just better at complaining now, or they just don't have an education and that they're doing okay? What do you think? Why do you think the masses have been fooled to think that they're being screwed while the wealthy are doing better?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, obviously, a lot of people do read the New York Times. A lot of people do respect the Census Bureau, and so what the supposedly learned people, including the academia, follow is the data from the U.S. Census Bureau. The data from the U.S. Census Bureau leaves out more than half the welfare payments that go to the poor. And so the intelligentsia, including trained economists, simply don't know that the Census Bureau is screwing up. They don't compile the data properly. They don't include, just as an example, would you include in welfare payments the fact that 46 million people are on food stamps? The value of those food stamps are part of welfare payments. Would you include that? Well,
yes.
You're a lot smarter, Rob, than the folks at the Census Bureau, because they don't include that in welfare payments to the poor. And so a huge reason, again, is that if the mainstream media says it, if the New York Times says it, even if the Wall Street Journal says it, then of course it percolates down to those who plagiarize the media and depend on what the media is saying, because they don't know how to look up the numbers. And maybe the folks at the New York Times know how to look up the census numbers, but they don't understand that the census people simply decided bureaucratically not to include all the welfare payments.
Excellent.
So that's,
all right,
that's a substantial reason why.
I will reserve my other questions for once we cover some ground so that I don't derail. So let's dig in. Let's see what you got.
Okay.
Here.
Now, the main thing, now you've asked me a broad question, Rob, about income. And obviously income, and I just want to make sure that we've made a proper transition. Obviously, the income of many rich people comes from investment, from inheritance. The income of most poor people, of course, unfortunately, most poor people, comes from welfare, or at least a considerable amount of it. And of course, obviously, the rich get welfare from Social Security. So a lot of income is not income that comes from employment. And so all I am doing is more narrowly focusing on employment and on profits conventionally measured. And all I'm doing is going after the misleading data that has gone viral on the idea that labor is getting screwed. Labor, people who work, are getting screwed. Now, I'm starting with the first chart, which is very popularly cited. And I had to manipulate it in order to show, which of course they all do, in order to show what is actually happening. I had labels up there, Rob. Unfortunately, you took them out.
On all the other slides, I included the labels.
Okay. All right. The red line is output per worker hour as measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in inflation-adjusted terms. The blue line is real compensation per hour. And the non-farm business sector tends to be the one that everybody loves to focus on, which of course is most of employment. Not a whole lot of people work on the farms, and of course, they're not including government. So this is the private sector, business sector, and it's everywhere. Various versions of it, but this is the standard version, and it comes directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which segues back to my earlier point. Are you going to believe the Census Bureau or believe me? Are you going to believe the Bureau of Labor Statistics or believe me? Well, people choose to believe the Bureau of Labor Statistics because this data comes directly from them. Now, you tell me what it shows. What is the red line of output per worker hour, which is labor productivity, show? And what does the blue line show in terms of the history of the way the two have fluctuated? What does it show?
Well, it shows that, I guess...
Look, come on, a little more into the mic, Rob.
My bad. It would show that labor is more productive and it's being paid better, but it's become more productive than it's captured in its wealth gains.
Well, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Labor has become more productive. That's the soaring red line. And up until the early 1970s, the increase in inflation-adjusted compensation per hour, that's real compensation per hour, tracked the increase in labor productivity. But by the early 70s or mid-70s, there was a huge divergence. The left-wing Economic Policy Institute calls it the productivity pay gap. What a huge scandal. Something happened. The capitalists are now not giving labor their share of the increase in productivity. And that started in the early 1970s. So clearly, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it, and that's what the data say, it must be true.
Now,
it's a complete fraud, but it is taken for granted. Now let's go to the next slide. A little bit of a digression.
I do have a question for you.
Go ahead. Yes.
On the broad analysis.
Yeah.
If we're only looking at basically what labor is being paid, and if it's not been, I guess I'm not even going to say this right. Okay, let's reframe this. If labor payments are up, and let's even say that they're up relative to inflation, doesn't that only look at one side of the equation? If the Fed has generally created policies that favor people that hold investments, like if you're going to look at, hey, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and the rich are holding a lot of assets that have been pumped up basically because of Fed credit expansions, or even more money being available to be borrowed that the poor doesn't have access to, but wealthy people do. Wouldn't that add to the wealth disparity and not be reflected?
Well, all right, Rob, again, I'll follow the Bernstein profundity, but I have to put it in context once again. First of all, again, I have to tell you that once you do a proper analysis of what actually goes to the top 10%, 1%, after they pay their taxes, once you do a proper adjustment to the bottom 10 or 20%, once you include all welfare, you do not find any great widening of inequality. But as I've said, you seem to be uninterested in my lecture because you want to talk about that. I'm only saying that, in fact, what you said is mistaken. The Federal Reserve is obviously a mischievous organization that should be abolished. That's my view. And the Fed. I'm only saying, however, that there still is a hugely progressive income tax in the United States. There is a huge welfare state in the United States. And according to proper data, there's been no noticeable widening of income distribution in the United States. So therefore, but I'm only talking, as I've said, about that most important source of income to the vast majority of people. That's why I'm trying to beg you, Rob, to recognize that I'm talking about something important. It's what labor gets. There are more than 170 million employed people in this country right now. They have jobs. Now, admittedly, by the way, I'm not breaking down the distribution of payment. I'm only taking, I'm going to get into that in a little bit later. However, I'm only taking a popular graph coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that says that not only are the rich getting richer, which of course, in relation to the poor, which Rob Bernstein claims mistakenly, because he's not aware of the fact the Census Bureau is full of it, but I'm only trying to point out to you that the further claim is that labor is getting royally screwed. It was good. Things went fine in the late 40s and 1950s. Go back to the chart, Rob, for a moment. Yes. Again, it's a very dramatic. It comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's very dramatic. It shows that in the great old days of unions, by the way, that's when labor unions were dominating, as the left wing likes to say, the increase in wages and compensation per hour of labor in the non-for-business sector was tracking the gains in productivity. But then unions started to go to hell, and look what happened. That's often their message, by the way. And that's pretty shocking that the disparity keeps up until it goes through the third quarter of 2025. So labor is getting royally screwed, and usually it's attributed to the decline in labor unions. It's also attributed, by the way, to the influx of immigrants. Of immigrants who are out competing labor. It's also attributed to the fact that we're buying too much from China, too many cheap goods coming in. That's making it hard for people to. It's attributed also to the rise of the high tech firms. It's all kinds of weird. The great old days of the 50s and 60s are over, and then by the 70s, everything got screwed up, and it's getting further screwed. That's the left wing mantra. Labor is getting screwed. And again, I hope you don't minimize it. This is what people do for a living, Rob. This is important. And you keep broadening into the idea of investment income and welfare and all that. And admittedly, I'm only talking about what labor is getting paid. But it's very important. It's most of what ordinary people get, their paychecks.
Right.
And their paychecks have not been rising
in line with productivity,
with the increase in productivity.
Okay,
that's the outrageous fact.
All right.
That is claimed by so many. I obviously haven't turned you on, Rob, to this fact that this is pretty disturbing, isn't it? If true.
Yes. Okay. So I just want, for my own clarity.
Yeah.
This chart does suggest that labor is not being paid in line with increases in productivity. And so now we're going to move forward debunking this, or I just want to make.
We're going to move forward to saying why it's total bullshit, Rob.
Got it. Okay, cool. I just I wanted to make sure that
I
was
and by the way,
in line.
again, the way you put it, Rob, again, it's suggesting it's screaming it out loud. Look at the divergence of those lines. It's astonishing.
Fair enough. You see, that's just.
I wanted to digress a little minute, but maybe I shouldn't. But since this is light, President Nixon announced the closing of the gold window on August 15, 1971. Now, the funny part of it is, I just wanted to give a little local color to this. Bob Murphy and others pounce on the fact that the divergence started around 1972-73, after Nixon announced the closing of the gold window. It did not start under Ronald Reagan. It started under Nixon, and then Ford, and then Carter, in the 70s. So they like to make that point. I keep telling Bob that, and all of those libertarians who won't listen to me, even though Rob Bernstein will, hopefully, and these listeners will, that you're throwing out a red herring. The fact of the matter is that the divergence never happened. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, God. Okay, yeah, this is interesting. I thought it would be interesting. I asked 4 different artificial intelligence sources, has labor output per hour in the U.S. non-farm business sector been rising faster than labor compensation per hour since the 1970s? Remember, that's what the BLS chart showed. So I asked Google, Perplexity, ChatGPT, and Grok. I don't need to read it all. Google, yes, labor productivity has risen significantly faster. That's Google. They're affirming it. Perplexity, yes. On standard measures, labor output per hour has been grown substantially faster. So they're saying, yes, what that chart I showed, it's been happening. ChatGPT, yes. In the non-farm business sector, which is what I was showing, it's been happening. To my astonishment, now look at Grok. No. Labor productivity has not consistently risen faster. Not if you do an apples to apples comparison. So I thought it would be interesting to point out that those 3 major sources of information for people, Google, Perplexity, and ChatGPT, are also full of shit.
Okay.
But to my pleasant surprise, Grok
gets it right.
Got it right. No, not if you do an apples to apples comparison. In other words, Grok is saying that the Bureau of Labor Statistics data do not do an apples to apples comparison. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now that's output per hour of all persons in nominal dollars. That's the same. What's that? That's the red line, and then the blue line is compensation per hour. You put it on the side in nominal dollars is the blue line. That's the same data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Notice that according to that chart, the divergence never happened. The red line is tracking the blue line. Now, Why is that an apples to apples comparison? Because I turned each of those data series not into inflation adjusted output per hour or inflation adjusted compensation per hour. I turned them into nominal dollars. Output is sold in nominal dollars. Labor is paid in nominal dollars. So, if the increase from year to year to year in nominal dollars of output sold and nominal dollars of compensation paid track each other, then there is no divergence.
All right. So can I ask you a question?
And isn't it what now to anticipate what I'm going to show you in a moment is that the only reason the Bureau of Labor Statistics gets the result it does get is because it's cooking the books. It's using two divergent price indexes to adjust output versus compensation. But again, when I delivered this talk at the Mises Institute, I thought I got the point across. In fact, I come to think of it, I did explain it to Tom Woods as well. Why not just put it in nominal dollars if you're trying to track them? Output is paid in sold in nominal dollars. Labor is paid in nominal dollars, and I'm just tracking them from year to year. So if they track each other in nominal dollars in terms of the increase, there's no divergence. Obviously, this never happened. You look puzzled, Rob. Maybe I better go to the next slide and we'll go back to the other one, and then maybe you'll understand. But you do understand, Rob, that businesses don't sell their output in inflation-adjusted dollars. They sell their output in nominal dollars. Recognize that labor is not paid in inflation-adjusted dollars. Labor is paid in nominal dollars. And so right. Therefore, I'm tracking the reality, an apples to apples comparison. I'm yelling at an apples to apples comparison of what actually happened in reality, in nominal dollars, not in inflation adjusted dollars, which are fictional dollars. And to anticipate, the only reason why the Bureau of Labor Statistics gets that result is that they insist on using very different, very divergent price indexes to adjust output versus adjusting compensation.
All right, so
that's why it's bullshit. Nominal dollars are the apples to apples comparison, and that's why, to my pleasant surprise, Grok got it right.
All right. So 2 questions for you.
A little louder.
First is
louder, Rob.
It's very odd that I'm coming through soft, but okay.
It's okay. I can hear you now, Rob. As long as I hear you.
All right. I hope I'm not too soft for the fans. No, it's odd that my technology.
Oh God, I'm talking a little bit too much into the mic. I was told not to. Yeah. Okay. Go on. That I was too much of an echo or something. Okay. Go ahead, Rob. You hear me now, right?
Yeah. No, I could hear you fine. I was.
Okay,
just being Jewish and complaining that for some reason my mic doesn't work the same
Just tell
way
me
every
when your
time I sit
bladder
down.
gets full, Rob, and I'll be able to entertain the audience with some great jokes about how the Jews are superior to the Goyim. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's something you agree with Epstein on, there aren't too many topics that you guys
I
might
heard
be
you
aligned.
mention that. Yeah. Why did God make Gentiles? Because somebody has to pay retail. It's
there you go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wish that wasn't such an old joke because I have a joke in my act that's not too dissimilar. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
My first question is: so when we look at and this might be in line with Bob Murphy and coming off the gold standard,
Good God.
But if you see the steady increase after 75 in both, I guess, business productivity and wage rates, is the increase in wage rates basically a mixture of that workers are adding more value because I guess technological developments are making them are boosting the
Well,
productivity, or are we looking at inflation and so you have to pay your
mostly looking at
labor more?
inflation. You're mostly looking at inflation,
Okay.
price inflation. Price inflation started to kick in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so you're mostly looking. But again, you it's a good question, Rob. I have no. In other words, if you want to resuscitate our mutual friend Bob, God loves you more than you can possibly imagine, as Bob says, and as I say to Bob, God has a very odd way of showing it, Bob. But apart from that, if you want to resuscitate our mutual friend Bob and say it looks as though there was a kind of a ratcheting up in the 70s of both the value of output and the value of compensation, then Bob is really only making the point that the closing of the gold window was preceded and was probably causally related to the climb in price inflation. So that's a point, but that's not relevant to my chart. My only point is that the simple-minded way of looking at it is to say that obviously wages rose because of price inflation. Output was sold for higher prices because of price inflation, mainly because, by the way, most measures of actual productivity tended to slow in the 70s, although they picked up in the 90s.
So
but
this
is not meant to measure anything relating to the real increase in productivity. That's a different issue. It's only meant to show that wages kept up with the increase in labor productivity simply because nominal and nominal tracked each other. That's what it's supposed to show, Rob. But if you're asking why the acceleration, of course, happened because we had by the mid 70s we had double-digit price inflation, but labor was getting paid more in current dollars because of it, and output was being sold more because of it. The crucial point is that the lines track each other all the way up to the present. But by the way, I'm going to measure them. Excuse me?
I do have two follow-up questions. I know it was supposed to only be two from the outset, but your answer gives me another question. So let's just go with this one next. I am uneducated, and before today, I don't think I've ever looked at a chart of business productivity. And I think I grasp the concept here that businesses are not being more productive than what they're paying their labor, so labor is capturing the gains in productivity. But if we were to look at a chart of business profits, would that track this as well?
Excuse me. Okay. I'm going to get to business profits.
Okay.
But just a moment. You understand that, again, productivity is simply labor productivity, different ways of measuring productivity. But the most popular way is you take output and you divide it by worker hours. In other words, so that's output per worker hour of all persons, output per hour of all persons working, obviously, all labor in the non-farm business sector. So that's output divided by hours. And in fact, if you want to tell a story about what was really happening to output per worker hour, we need a different chart. But again, I would imagine all I'm saying really is that I am taking the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. I'm accepting them as valid. All I'm doing is turning them into nominal dollars, which, by the way, they don't offer you that data on their website. But since I am an experienced data digger, it was very easy for me. No, actually, they do give you compensation per hour in nominal dollars. They just don't give you output per hour in nominal dollars. But it was very easy for me to convert it to nominal dollars. Nobody questions my expertise in that regard. It's a very simple process. So that's what I did in order to show that the whole outrageous idea about the pay productivity gap is bullshit. There is no gap.
But now,
by the way, if you go to the next chart, I'm even going to put a finer point on it.
Can I ask you one more question on this one?
Yeah.
And this is going to annoy you, but
Rob,
yes.
you annoy me all the time.
That's why I shouldn't have to be concerned about
anyway.
it.
I love
Excellent.
and
Perfect.
admire you.
Okay, so if I'm looking at a chart of people's wages going up in line with productivity, but they're both mainly going up because of inflation,
so
aren't I also seeing that? Well, it's two parts. Aren't I first seeing that labor isn't necessarily any better off because it's just going up in line with inflation?
Yeah.
And then also if you have an inflationary economy that benefits the rich over the poor, can't you still come to the same conclusion that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer?
Okay. I'll answer both questions, Rob. Of course, I'm annoyed by your questions, Rob, but annoyance is good.
Okay.
You're a probing interview, Rob. And I would have quit you long ago if it was all about annoyance. But anyway, okay. Number one, we know all the evidence shows that. I can only assert I didn't bring charts for that because the Rob Bernstein mind goes in every annoying direction. But I can tell you that through every decade up until the present, any conventional or any even semi-reliable measure of labor productivity rose. So labor productivity did rise. Any proper measure shows that. But so therefore, and then any proper measure also shows that that after, now we're going to get into the can of worms about price inflation. Any proper measure shows you that on all levels of income. Again, the point I find it necessary to focus on is where are most people in relation to 2019? 2019 was prior to the 2020 lockdown when we had nearly 15% unemployment, when the government crashed the economy. So 2019 is, to my mind, the baseline. Have we recovered from 2019 after all the destruction that was wrought since 2019? My look at all aspects of the data and looking under every rock is that most people are a bit ahead of the game. Most people, even on the lower levels, are doing a bit better than they did in 2019. They're not doing worse. Now, with that said, one of the most important things that's been stressed is that people under the age of 35 are having more trouble buying a home. And that's true. So therefore, the home ownership rate among those 35 and under, which is the number I'm able to access, is at lows. And so that is true. So therefore, more of them are renting rather than owning homes. It's not that, I actually could, I have the number ready at hand, but we shouldn't do it. It actually isn't. It's about 1/3 of them own homes, and it used to be like over 40%, 45%. So it's down by about 5 to 10 points. It's not been a total disaster, but it's down. And so if you want that answer, I can only tell you that I want to mention, well, you do understand, of course, this gets into arguments and discussions about the standard price indexes. And we, usually, by the way, I prefer the long-term looks. For example, when people tell me that, in the old days, 1960, you could support a family of 4 on one income, the guy, and now you need 2 incomes to support a family of 4. Well, then I don't have to deal with price indexes. I can point out that family of 4 did not have air conditioning, could not afford to make a long distance phone call, could not afford to fly on a plane, had black and white TV sets that shut down, had cars that rusted out. They bought used cars that rusted out after like 10,000 miles. Their homes were about on average about half the size of the median size home today. So if you want to live the way they lived in 1960, then it'd be pretty easy to do that. And when they had no cell phones, they owned these old-fashioned smartphones rather. So again, their standard of living was so much lower. If you want to live that way and try to replicate 1960, it'd be very easy to do it on one income. Now, why do I mention that? Because I generally prefer not to use price indexes. I generally prefer to use disaggregated data to try to look at what was the standard. What did the median household that owned their own home actually consume in those days, and what they consumed would be considered totally unacceptable to those of us today. So now I go to 1960 for that reason. I have more difficulty getting decent data on comparing today with 2019 in terms of aggregating what we consume. Although, but so therefore it's a little bit more difficult. But I find that look at 1960 versus the present pretty much coincides with the price indexes. But in any case, Rob, you understand that for us to discuss, I gave you my answer. Most people are doing a bit better than they did in 2019. And of course, most of them are working people. Most of them rely on a paycheck, and with the main exception being that the home ownership rate is not in the pits for under 35, but it's certainly at lows.
And for people looking for more information on that, you and I did a Zero Hedge podcast where we talked about licensing laws and other issues that are getting in the way of home ownership. I'm not licensing zoning laws.
Well, indeed. A lot of things get in the way of home ownership. Of course, it's mainly the government that gets in the way of home ownership, for sure. Okay. All right. So I hope, but again, to review, Rob, productivity has risen in every decade. And I think that the numbers are reasonably persuasive about that, in actual output per worker hour, and therefore compensation has increased in meaningful terms. So you were right to imply that I was just trying to show the parallel in current dollars because they're using divergent price indexes. But I wanted to put a finer point on my findings, and this is what I did was I measured the average annual increase in nominal dollars in output per hour of all persons. The chart you just saw, it increased 5.53%, and the compensation was 5.36%. A little bit behind, but it's amazing. It's amazing that the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, once you take away the distortion of the price indexes, can so closely parallel each other. And then, so because 1973 is sort of like the turning point in terms of the bogus, the fraudulent chart that says there's a divergence. 1973 to Q3 2025, a similar divergence. Output has been increasing 4.99% a year, and compensation 4.68%. Again, it's remarkable that these numbers are so close to each other because they come from different sources. That the Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you actually look at the current nominal dollars, can get it so close. They lagged a little bit, but obviously there's huge error in these numbers. But it was fairly consistent that in the great old days, compensation per hour in nominal dollars lagged a bit. In the bad old days, starting in 73, compensation also lagged a bit, but they were pretty close. That's all. Right. But I want to go
before we go to the next slide. There's one thing that you and I can agree on.
You want to bring up? Go ahead, Rob.
No. There's something that you and I can both agree on, which is
this is not going to annoy me.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We can both stand to make more money. So let's take an opportunity just to plug before the next slide. I've got a gig this weekend in New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah.
Close to selling out at the Shell. And of course, you've got your ongoing debate series, which is incredible, called the Soho Forum.
Oh, you're going to take a moment for me to plug. Okay.
And why don't you let people know what the next debate is coming up?
The next debate is March 4th, and it's going to be an incredible knockdown, drag-it-out fight. Terence Keeley has co-written a book. Terence Keeley, who has taught me a lot about the nature of research and development, has now co-written a book saying the National Institutes of Health should be abolished. That's a $46 billion agency. And they're supposed to be the ones who further medical research. And he says that the National Institutes of Health actually retards medical research. It's been a drag on medical research ever since its inception decades ago. I got to oppose him, the former dean of Harvard Medical School, and named Jeffrey Fleer. He's the former dean of Harvard Medical School, and I will tell you, I haven't turned Terence Keeley this, but if he's listening, he'll find out. I've gotten some of the most vitriolic notes from Jeffrey Fleer. He finds Terence Keeley to be a scourge on humanity, to even talk about abolishing the National Institutes of Health. As a moderator, Rob, the only thing that I've got to guard against is character assassination. You know I never allow that, except, of course, when Scott Horton debates William Crystal. That's when the character assassination hit new heights, and I probably was irresponsible in not stopping it and telling Scott to lay off and stop calling William Crystal a war criminal. But anyway, so it's going to be very exciting. March 4th in April. In April we're going to be debating Mayor Mamdani and whether he has any prospects of making New York City more affordable. Mamdani will have had more than his first 100 days in office, 150 days in office,
and the snow might still be on the ground.
Excuse me.
And he might have the incredible feat of still having snow on the ground.
Having snow on the ground.
Yeah, all the way in April.
Well, it's going to be late April. It's going to be late April. Okay.
All right.
I don't know. What are you blaming him for the snow, Rob? I don't know what's wrong with you.
That and the trash and the rats. We never had rats before Mamdani got in. All right.
Okay. Well, anyway, so we're going to debate. There will be, what are the prospects for Mamdani? We will already have seen a lot of his track record, making New York City more affordable for most residents. Then so that's April. In May, we're having a debate. Billionaires should pay more in taxes. And I've got a brilliant professor from Yale Law School defending that resolution against, I forget his name, I'm sorry, from the Cato Institute. Billionaires should pay more in taxes. And of course, you totally agree with that, Rob. You sure as hell have no chance of ever becoming a billionaire. Why the hell shouldn't they pay more?
I'm okay
and
with
you
that.
Pay less.
So
you'll be cheering on the Yale law professor about how they should be paying more in taxes. And in June, I'm actually setting up a debate. I can't divulge who the debaters will be, but the resolution will approximately read that ICE, the immigration enforcement folks, should complete their mandate in expelling all illegal aliens currently residing in the United States.
That's a bold
They have to
one.
complete that mandate, Rob,
no
and that's why we need a police state, because once they come to New York City, it's going to be a fucking shit show. There were thousands of protesters again. 61%, according to the New York Times, 61% of those polled want ICE to be shut down. But anyway, so that's going to be June. I'm putting that one together, and I usually like to be 3 or 4 debates ahead. So again, March 4th is the first one. Go on thesohoforum.org, and you'll be able to buy tickets to those first 3 that I mentioned, especially the one about billionaires, Rob, which you won't want to miss. Screw the
those
billionaires.
all sound great, and if I can get in for them, I will be there. And you guys can get the slightly, what's it, $10 more, and you get to go to your house and have beers with Gene and eat some of the fine spread. Does that option still exist?
Oh, that's right, Rob, and that's the part
That's the
that
value
people love.
buy.
It's amazing how many libertarians end up having inadvertent sex with each other. Since the mob scene, what I'm kidding is only that the crush of
I was like,
bodies.
I missed that party. I leave too early. I didn't realize it turns into Epstein's Island after I go.
A lot of attractive young women come, Rob. It's amazing.
I
And a
know. I
lot of
never
young
pull any
people.
numbers. I got to hang
Well,
out more.
I
All right.
mean, yeah.
Let's move
Yeah, and-
on. What's our next slide that we got?
Okay,
here,
so
Gene?
Rob, this is again backing and filling on the story. These are the price indexes that the Bureau of Labor Statistics used. The one they used the Consumer Price Index, that's the red line. Then they used, now this one I know you can ask me some annoying questions about, Rob. I'm going to try to. Then they used something called for the non-farm business, the value added output price deflator. Now notice that up until the 1970s, the two pretty much tracked each other. Then the consumer price index took off, and the non-farm business sector price deflator rose very slowly.
I got to tell you, the price
Huge
deflator
diversion.
sounds like
So-
something out of a Mel Brooks movie. What is a price deflator?
Okay, Rob. Look, Rob, I'm glad that you're quite willing to confess your ignorance of the basics, even though you sound off on economics when you're on. Anyway, that aside, they call it a deflator, so I had to call it a deflator. A deflator and a price index are the same thing. A price index, you take a price index and say that I earned $50,000 10 years ago, and I'm earning $70,000 now, and so that's 20,000 increase in nominal dollars. But how do I inflation adjust it? I use the consumer price index to deflate. I divide the price index into the number from 10 years ago, divide the higher price index into the number of 10 years later. And of course, it always invariably deflates, because the price index is almost always rising. So it's referred to as a deflator because it's always rising. And once you slam it, divide the number by the index, you're going to be deflating it. So that's why they call a price index a deflator. They're the same, they're synonymous terms. So all I'm saying is that now we're going to get into the can of worms that will induce you to get annoying, Rob. But what I'll tell you the crazy part about the Bureau of Labor Statistics using the Consumer Price Index. It's not even a continuous series. They changed it radically in the year 2000, and the idea of using a series that keeps changing to deflate a number is simply a violation of Econ 101. But in any case, the Consumer Price Index took off, and the non-business sector value output price deflator was pretty flat. Now, that's the only arithmetical reason for the divergence that I began with. They're using two sets of books. They're using a price deflator that whams into price inflation for the consumers, and they're using a price deflator that is very flat on the other side. Now, you might ask, well, maybe they should have done that. Well, let me at least tell you that, of course, it's interesting to inquire into why there was such a huge divergence between the two price deflators. But that inquiry is not going to tell you anything about what really happened to wages compensation of labor versus output of labor. Current dollars will tell you that. But I want to tell you something else about that price deflator. You do understand
Can I
that,
ask a
that
quick
the
question?
non-farm, excuse me?
Can I ask a quick question just for
Yeah,
clarity?
yeah.
So if I'm understanding all this correctly, if I look at the bottom line, which is the price deflator,
Of the non-farm business sector, yeah.
Am I seeing that adjusted for inflation, people are doing better, or am I seeing that as it rises, that is that showing me them like real wages after you make the change of taking away inflation through the deflator
Well, that's right.
that it's rising, or am I
Timon.
seeing something else?
Okay, Timon. These price deflators tell you nothing about how people are doing.
Okay.
But just to maybe I'll circle back to your question and then try to elaborate on a particular point. That value output, added output of the non-farm business sector is mostly not goods or services that go to consumers. Perhaps you know, Rob, that most transactions in the economy are what are called B2B. Most businesses are not selling to consumers. Most businesses are selling to other businesses. And so that deflator is simply a very different story about what was happening in the economy. It was the rising price index, mostly of business to business transactions. And when you call it value added, it's that in the non-farm business sector, for example, the non-farm business sector might be selling tractors to farmers. That doesn't go to consumers. It might be selling equipment to other manufacturing industries, or tables and chairs to restaurants that are privately owned that are not. That's not a good example because they're business. So all I'm saying is, though, that it's mostly B2B transactions. So all I'm trying to say is that it doesn't have anything specifically to do with what consumers had to pay. Now, if you ask the question about income, if I were to put that consumer price index against any number for compensation, labor compensation, income, or whatever, and then deflated, in other words, you have to take the nominal dollars and then you divide them by the consumer price index and hence deflate, and then you get something in real terms. And then all we're doing is circling back to what your obsession, which is that basically you'll find that that wages and salaries and compensation have risen faster than conventionally measured price inflation, because you seem to be harping on that. I'm only trying to make a different point, and that's why you're annoying me, Rob. Let's go back to the chart. I'm only trying to point out that if you have price deflators, because the consumer price index is a deflator, you divide that are very divergent from each other, and you get a divergent series merely because the price deflators are so divergent, then you should at least point out that the difference between the inflation adjusted compensation and the inflation adjusted output diverge, not because they're really diverging in current dollars,
but because they're rigging the
but because you're using two sets of books. You're using one deflator that slams the consumer price in what they're earning compared to what you're using for the output price deflator. Now, again, it's of interest perhaps to ask, why was there such a divergence? Why did the B2B transactions, which are for the most part what we're talking about, why do those prices rise so much slower? But it doesn't have anything to do with the focus. Keep our eye on the ball. What was happening to compensation, versus labor productivity? Well, the easiest way to find out is to forget with the Mishigas, with the price deflators or the price indexes, and simply compare current dollars with current dollars, because you simply want to know, did they track each other or did they not track each other? And the answer is they did. People are paid in nominal dollars. Output is sold in nominal dollars. The nominal dollar series track each other. And so all I'm trying to do is explain why the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting these numbers. Now, if they were a little bit less left-leaning, they would also report my nominal dollars series. If they want to insist on this series that is driven only not by the reality of what people are being paid, but simply by the divergent price indexes, then fine. But at least do an apples to apples comparison, which is what Grok called for and why Grok said, no, it's not true. I hope I've made that clear, Rob, although you seem to be a little bit puzzled.
No, I'm on board. All right.
Okay.
Let's go to the next one here.
Okay. Well, all right. Now I'm taking a swipe. I'm going to kiss this off a little bit by taking a swipe at the Economic Policy Institute, the left-wing organization with whom I've had occasional exchange. Obviously, anything that, I mean, look, we're all like that a little bit, Rob. I guess anything that confirms our prejudices, we're going to pounce on, and uncritically. You know, we're going to say, hey, look, hey, wow, the Bureau of Statistics is saying that, so it must be true. Okay, so I'm just citing something they published very recently, January 16th, 2026, just 3 weeks ago, called the productivity pay gap. And that's influencing remember I showed you Perplexity, ChatGPT, Google, only Grok got it right. The productivity pay gap. I'm not showing their chart, but their chart shows the divergence. Okay. A rising tide, they write, should lift all boats. When the economy expands, everybody should reap the rewards. The outcome can be guaranteed by smart and compassionate policy choices. Of course, in their socialist idea, the policy choices are what matter, or subverted by policy makers choosing a different path. It's all about what policy makers do. And then they show a productivity pay gap very similar to the one I began with. But I want to especially draw attention to what data they use. Now look at what is in the fine print there. Data are for compensation of production non-supervisory workers in the private sector. Not for all workers, but for production and non-supervisory workers in the private sector. That's the data that they are using as of 2025-26, up until the present. Okay. Now, what is a production and non-supervisory worker? Well, if you ask the average schlub of a journalist who covers the economy, or the average schlub of an academician, or the average schlubs at the Economic Policy Institute, it's supposed to be the lower 80% of workers. The average comes of the lower 80%, because what is it? Production workers is a kind of a manufacturing concept. They're on the production line. They're not the foremen in charge, the managers. And then The Bureau of Labor Statistics invented a new category once the service sector arose called non-supervisory workers. Non-supervisory. So they don't supervise. I'll tell you something funny, Rob, before we get to the real facts of the matter about the scandal of the use of this data. If you look in the Bureau of Labor Statistics instructions, you know what their definition of non-supervisory workers is? Workers who don't supervise. Is that a very helpful definition, Rob?
Doesn't sound like it.
What is a non-supervisor? Now, as I also once jokingly wrote, I was a columnist. I was economics editor at Barron's. When my company was asked, what does Gene Epstein get paid? Because we want to know, and we first want to know, is he a supervisory or is he a non-supervisory worker? They probably spent several years trying to figure it out. Why? Because I did supervise some people, but I was also supervised by the editors in charge. So they probably couldn't figure it out. And I learned very early on, I wrote about it in my book. I talked to all the people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They knew that the numbers were bullshit. Now, let me get to the next slide and then we can elaborate a little bit. Oh my God, no, you're going back, Rob. Go forward.
I know, I clicked the wrong button. I got you. Run slide 8.
Okay. I'm gonna, before I get, okay, it's a little busy, Rob, but what happened was this. They were reporting to me that the problem they were having with the response rate in the service sector, the vast majority of companies, of course, were in the service sector by then, is that section of the questionnaire, what are you paying your non-supervisory workers, was being left blank. Companies were simply not filling it out. Now, I also knew, so they weren't filling it out, and they said that we're planning to discontinue the series because we're finding that for so many sample cells, we're getting like practically no respondents, like 1% or 2% response rate. And so we have to make up so many of the numbers. We have to just go on a tiny sample, a very inadequate sample, so the data are no damn good because so many companies simply don't know what the hell a non-supervisory worker is. They don't bother with it. And then on top of that, what I knew from other data is that the non-supervisory workers' data were really sluggish. And what I brought to the party is that the companies that were not filling it out were the very companies that made no such distinctions, that didn't keep track of any such distinctions, and were therefore probably the companies that were paying their workers more, that were probably giving stock options on all levels to their workers. So what they were missing out on by not reporting, by pretending they knew the numbers, is that the companies that were paying better were the very companies that were leaving it out. Now, in my book, I documented this, but now I recently was sent a 2003 article by the then chief of the Division of Current Employment Statistics, announcing that they were now going to quit asking people about the non-supervisory workers and simply asking them about all workers. not the non-supervisory, but what are all your workers getting paid? A much easier question to answer. So now, what did Patricia Getz write in 2003? After the all-employee hours and earnings series becomes well-established with users, that's the all-employee, every employee, what are they getting paid? And there is a sufficient history to permit seasonal adjustment. The production non-supervisory worker series will be discontinued. BLS tentatively plans to drop these series in 2009. That was nearly 16, 17 years ago that they were planning to drop the series. Drop it, eliminate it, because it was bullshit. Now, what's the next part? Be patient here, because I want to cite authority. Oh, what are you just doing to me, Rob?
I'm
go back to the Pat Getz.
All right, we're still on slide
God,
8.
you trigger, Rob. I'm reading from the statement. Okay, Rob, I guess you're getting bored with me. Anyway, look, another impetus for the transition to an all-employee definition is the increasing difficulty that many respondents have compiling information for the production and non-supervisory definitions presently used by the CES program. Most payroll record keeping does not allow for the easy identification of workers defined by the CES categories of production and non-supervisory workers. These categories simply are not meaningful to employers, and records are not kept for these groupings of workers. This leads to a relatively high item non-response rate for payroll and hours data compared with the all-employee data item, because they're asking them about all employees. So I guess you feel I've gone into tiresome detail here, Rob, but all I'm trying to point out to you that the left-leaning Economic Policy Institute continues to use a series that the Bureau of Labor Statistics said they would discontinue in 2009 and publicly explained why. And as I point out, the people who were not categorizing them were clearly the companies who were paying better. Now I'll tell you something that I have not researched, but I can tell you that I'm almost definitely confident that this scandal happened. In order for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to discontinue a series, it has to announce it on the Federal Register. And the Federal Register then has to solicit comments from users. Now, they didn't discontinue the series. They continued it. They repudiated the series, but they still release it up to the present. The main reason?
They didn't want bad comments.
They got blitzed by the left-wing nuts who loved the series because the series was always in the toilet. That's probably what happened. There's another side explanation. The series had a longer history. They introduced an all-employee series starting in 2006, and of course the production non-supervisory workers goes back to like the mid-60s and before. But I believe that the left-wingers blitzed them with objections, and since they are left-wing oriented anyway, they relented, even though they are on record as repudiating the series, on record as planning to discontinue it because it was garbage, but they still release it.
They decided if
and
the
like economic policy to me,
they decided if people like our garbage, we'll put out the garbage. It's a very government function.
The people who like their garbage are the people who like garbage that understates, that keeps reporting that wages are in the toilet. And as I tried to explain to you, the main reason why they
an
discontinued
artificial
it was that
terminology of supervisor roles.
the higher paying firms that didn't make such distinctions were the very firms that were not reporting. So it was in the toilet. The left-wingers loved it. They didn't want to run afoul of the left-wingers, so they kept producing it, despite the fact that they're on record as having repudiated it.
So just to give it a 15-second summary, they came up with this bullshit distinction of supervisory roles, and as a result of non-supervisory roles, and as a result of the bullshit distinction, they're able to understate the growth in wages for American workers to pretend like there's more of a disparity than there is.
Well, and the reason why, it wasn't something that they planned on. It was only that obviously, I'm sorry, if they are able to, if you're talking about the Economic Policy Institute, yes, that's correct. Those masterminds at the Economic Policy Institute choose to ignore the overwhelming record. This again was from the chief, Patricia Getz, that they were discontinuing it because it was no damn good, because the companies were not responding. So they ignore those facts. And they continue to use a series of the BLS repudiated. But then, of course, I have to explain how come the BLS changed their minds. Well, they certainly didn't improve the series. They certainly didn't revise the series. They were still stuck with a series that was getting underreported. I can only guess that the Bureau of Labor Statistics did an about face because they got such a torrent of protest from the left-wingers who loved the series. That's the only possible explanation. And a scandal about the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well, of course, the usual scandal about the loonies at the Economic Policy Institute who keep influencing the ChatGPT, but they don't fool Grok. Anyway.
All right, let's pull up the next slide here.
Well, in the next slide, I try to show compensation per hour in nominal terms, average hourly earnings, production supervisory workers in nominal terms. And this is just the nominal numbers with the nominal numbers of the non-supervisory workers. And all I'm trying to underscore there is that obviously that's why this is neither number is inflation adjusted. But even in nominal terms, look at how the production of non-supervisory workers trend is in the shitter compared to the more broad compensation per hour. So it was lagging and lagging and lagging. And of course, I'm only saying that that's the reason why they love the blue line and hate the red line. That's all. So that's all I'm trying to say about the scandal there. And I hope, Rob, you're sufficiently shocked. But I know, look, Rob, I got to mention, of course, obviously, the Epstein files are a lot more important than what I'm saying. But
no, I'm on board. All right.
Okay. All right. Now we're shifting gears.
Okay.
We're still talking about compensation.
Before we shift gears, why don't we take it as an opportunity for a pee break? I did pretty good this time. I made
your bladder is full, Rob.
I made a whole hour and 17 minutes.
Rob, look, if you've got diarrhea, I'm your friend. I'll entertain the folks.
All right, you might. No. It's going to be all of 60 seconds.
Rob, I don't get it. I'm a 61-year-old with a weak bladder. Okay, take your pee, Rob.
There you go. I warn you though that the comments this time might be feistier than the last time, so don't take them too personally.
Oh my God. Okay, well, go ahead. Let me see the insults.
All right, I'll be back shortly, everybody.
Two great dudes in the house.
Have fun with Gene. Feel free to float your questions.
Two great dudes in the house. Well, that's true.
I'll be back momentarily.
Bernstein and Epstein, no relation to Jeffrey Epstein. Robbery is my favorite. He's saying that I love you, Gene, don't hate me. Oh, for God's sake. I love anybody who loves me. Rob is my IBS. I don't know what the hell that stands for. IBS. Adam, could you please clarify? He's saying that high outweigh the gravity and number of people making low, where every job forces the actual average into multiple. Oh, okay. Well, look, multiple part-time jobs. The fact of the matter is that there is data on people who have multiple part-time jobs, and that's at a low. There aren't, I mean, again, I guess, look, again, it's fairly simple to do now, but numerous. It's fairly simple is irritable bowel syndrome. It's, oh, for God's sake. It's a good thing if you don't know again. Okay. Anyway, look, again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a household survey done by the Census Bureau every month. Now, the monthly data are filled with noise. They fluctuate. So you have to look at the trends over a 12-month period, which bounce around and so on. But the numbers over a 12-month, 18-month period confirm that that those who report having a more than one job are at lows. I can't say that record lows. I'm trying to remember the actual good data go back to 1994. Prior to 94, they didn't have a good survey, but really there's no peak, no great increase at all in those holding multiple jobs. I didn't mind at all what they said, Rob, and the irritable bowel syndrome guy had a good joke at your expense, not at mine. And apart from that, the only complaint, was that I'm overlooking the fact that everybody has to hold multiple jobs, and I'm overlooking that fact. And all I'm saying is that again, monthly surveys are done by the Bureau of Labor Household Survey. Actually, it's Census Bureau workers who survey people every month. They ask a series of questions. Among other things, do you have more than one job? Do you have two full-time jobs? Do you have two part-time jobs? Whole series of questions. Now, it's a sample. There's error in the sample. There's always data noise from month to month. So you have to look at the 12 and 18-month trends because then the data noise tends to sort of cancel itself out. Data noise, of course, tends to be sample error, non-sampling error, and in fact, the multiple job holders, however you define them, you have two full. You of course are a multiple job holder, Rob, but that's because your career ain't going great. So what do you let me see now? You do porch tours. You do. You have 3 jobs, Rob, and you still can't afford. Rob, have you turned on the heat at 0-degree weather?
Not at night, but during the day. At night, I got myself some good sleeping bags. I'm ready to go. You can move me up to Everest, and I'm good to go. But
Rob,
I've relaxed the household heat policy.
Rob,
The Run Your Mouth Enterprise Heat Index of America is up this year.
Rob, with your weak bladder, I hope you're not wetting the bed. You have to get out of bed. What?
Hasn't happened yet. Not
I
since
actually
I'm like 12 or 13.
I keep a bottle with a cork right by my bed because I got dystonia. I don't like to get up to go to the bathroom, so I just sort of anyway. Enough about urination, Rob. Enough about diarrhea. Your bladder is empty. Your mind is open, and let's get to the next story. Now, this is also from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just directly lifted. That agency that can never get anything right. Non-financial corporations, by the way, non-financial corporations, first of all, have to meet reporting requirements so that the data are better than those businesses that are not incorporated. So that's one thing. So the data are better, and that's why corporations, which of course do dominate the economy, are better. And then secondly, non-financial corporations are a good choice because the financial corporations back in the 50s used to be like 3% of corporations, and now they're up to 13%. And so they've risen greatly as a share of all corporations, and they're run by different rules. They actually pay the labor share for financial corporations is actually lower in terms of share, but their incomes are higher. They distort the numbers, and therefore it's a big tradition to use non-financial. The non-financial corporations still they used to account for 96% of all corporations, and now they account for 87%. And so they're a good continuous series. And so that's, I just wanted to explain that category and the reason for it, because it's going to recur. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the share of all revenue going to non-financial corporations, and they show that it's in the shitter compared to the past. The left wing also loves this data, even though even on its face it's a little bit strange. I'll tell you now, obviously, what the left wing likes to say is that, well, I can tell you that I lived through the 1950s and 60s, and the left wing was telling us that capitalism is really crappy and everything is crappy and nothing is good. But now, of course, they look back on the 1950s and early 60s in particular as the great old days, because we didn't have all those low-paid immigrants. We didn't have all that cheap goods coming from China. We had unions in the private sector accounting for 35% of all workers in the private sector, and now it's 5.8%, by the way, most recently in the private sector. It's gone from 35% down to less than 6%. So the unions have been wrecked. And so those were the great old days, the 1950s and 60s. And of course, that's the story they like to tell when they look at productivity and labor share. But here's the only funny part, which I'm going to go back to, but it's still worth emphasizing now. The funny part is that by the year 2000, the private sector unions were less than 10%. Already fallen from 35% to 9% as in the private sector. And yet, the labor share pretty much held. And another small technical explanation, those gray areas, those gray bars are recessions. And there's an artificial spike in labor share, ironically, because in recessions, the lower paid workers tend to get laid off faster than the managers. And so we lose in terms of the share, the lower paid workers, and there tends to be then an artificial spike in share because the higher paid, more skilled workers tend to be retained because of labor hoarding, and the lower paid people tend to be laid off. So therefore, I wanted to put in those gray areas in order to account for those spikes, which are only due to recessions and nearly not really part of the main story. But for most of the time, we don't have those gray areas. Although those yellow areas, of course, periods of expansion. And we find that for the most part, it was pretty flat. But then the shit started to hit the fan. And of course, this is a perfect story, I guess, for the left wingers, because then George W. Bush takes over, although, of course, Obama also takes over and it's in the shitter. And now it's still, and by the way, of course, it spiked again during the lockdown period, that what is now regarded as a brief recession, but now it's back in the shitter. Now, that's the share that labor gets. Just 55%? Oh, yeah, we got 56.4%. I drew a red line just to show that, it was down actually during the Obama years, but it's back down to where it was. So labor is getting shafted by those greedy corporations. their share is way down. And I will tell you that free marketeers believe it. It's conventional wisdom. It disconcerts them, but they feel they can't deny it. And after all, this is directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's their story. Also, bullshit.
All right, let's see why it's bullshit.
Let's get to the next display. Gene, what's the guy's name? Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. The first clue about why it's bullshit is this. I knew it was bullshit before I came across this article, this paper. It's by an economist, not at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is part of the Labor Department, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Excuse me?
It's like a Monty Python sketch. You got the Bureau of Labor Statistics arguing with the Statistics Labor Bureau.
Look, it's fucking government, Rob. Look, Rob, if you want to ask an interesting question, if we really had a free market, I wouldn't want government to be keeping any data. Statistics, the root of the term statistics is the state. So it's ugly.
They were going to say
Rob.
Stink.
The state. So therefore, it's all ugly. I agree with you. But although, by the way, for another interview, if you asked me, would, in the absence of the state running the data, any data, would we still have a private sector interest in statistics and data? The answer is I think we would. Different kinds, but we would. But anyway, this is an economist at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Now, I knew prior to reading this paper that he knew what he was talking about. But I just want to throw this out for a moment as a teaser, and I'm going to get back to it. Is labor's loss capital's gain? Then he writes, this is the first two sentences of his introduction. U.S. labor share has been falling since the 1970s. I show that it has not fallen as much once items that do not add to capital, depreciation, and production taxes are netted out. Now, in fact, I'll anticipate, he begins coyly. I corresponded with him, by the way, Benjamin Bridgman. He begins coyly, but then he goes on to show charts saying that as of 2016, once you actually use a proper measure for what labor is sharing, then you find that the share is within the historical range, that what the Bureau of Labor Statistics listed is bullshit. I'll tell you something else. I tried to suggest to Benjamin Bridgman that he get in touch with the ignoramuses at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and tell them to quit releasing that ignorant, naive, bullshit chart of theirs. But of course, Benjamin is a team player and he's not going to cause any trouble. He's still there. He's still at the, last I checked, he's still at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. But he writes this expose that points out that you have to do a proper adjustment. And that's what I'm going to get to. Gross versus net labor shares. Because the Bureau of Labor Statistics has issued a fraudulent chart. Let's get to the next display. Okay. Now what I've done here, just for the sake of the discussion, is that I've taken gross output, the gross revenue, gross numbers of the non-financial corporations, labor share, all employees, and this is from the Bureau. What the hell? No.
Is this the wrong chart?
Well, I don't know how that got put there. It's actually from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, but it doesn't matter. It replicates non-financial corporation.
I think I went the wrong way. Hold on one second. This was
Oh, no. That's right. You went back.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Will you go forward,
I'm
Rob?
trying.
God
I'm trying
almighty.
here. I think this is this what we're looking for?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Okay. My bad.
Thank you, Rob. God almighty. Okay. Rob, did you fully urinate? Okay. Anyway.
This
Okay.
happens to me on my live show too. It's
Okay,
whatever.
Rob. Yeah. Okay, Rob, you're annoying me. Anyway. Okay. Now, this is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and actually, just for the sake of building the argument, I took the same gross output figures from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, divided them by the labor compensation, and I got exactly the same chart that for non-financial corporations, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics produced. I only want to show that I can produce the same chart from the Bureau of Economic Analysis data, but this was the chart, or charts basically like it, that Bridgman was pointing out are misleading. Now let's go to the next chart. Okay. All right, so that tells the real story. Non-financial law corporations' labor compensation as a percentage share of income, net of depreciation, and of taxes on production. Now, let me remind the listener and you that that's a direct quote from Benjamin Bridgman. He said, what you have to do is take the non-financial corporation's income and net it out for the depreciation of capital, for what they have to spend on and what they have to set aside due to the depreciation of their capital, and what they have to pay for taxes merely because they're producing. This is not taxes on profits. This is the taxes on what they have to pay merely because they're producing something.
So just to give the short,
yeah,
if you're looking at corporations making more money or a larger share, it's because they're not deducting all of the expenses that corporations have. And
who's they? I'm sorry. Who's they? The Bureau of Labor Statistics?
I guess, yes.
Yeah. Also, of course, the left-wing lunatics of all stripes, and including, by the way, a lot of free marketeer libertarians. But I want to walk you through the chart because there is a subtlety about it.
Okay.
Now, what does it basically show? I've drawn it's quarterly numbers, and I've drawn the red line, and it was at 75%. And now I've got it all the way back to the late 1940s. Now, first of all, what you basically, now, of course, also it tends to spike during recessions for reasons that I've mentioned, because they lay off the lower paid workers and keep the managers. But what I basically showed is that if you look at the period from 2005 through 2025 and focus on the growth periods, and now look at the period for the 50s, 60s, and into the early 60s, and even into the later 60s, the numbers are pretty similar. The only odd part, which actually I'm a little surprised by, is if you notice during the spikes in 55 and late 50s, when there was a recession, there was an even bigger spike. But that was just recession related. All I'm suggesting is that it shouldn't be too difficult. I didn't want to put too many lines on this graph. Number one, obviously, the 75% of the third quarter pretty much matches a low in the mid 60s. It's very close to the mid 50s. It's higher than the early 50s. That's the recent quarter. But more precisely, I'm also trying to show that if you actually review the ups and downs in the 50s and 60s, you'll find that what's been happening since '05 is actually pretty much a return to the late 1940s, 1950s, and most of the 1960s. So the first point to be made is that we're actually finding that labor share is about the same as it was during the heyday of unions. Actually, the same as it was when there were practically no low-skilled immigrants in the country, when we weren't importing huge amount of cheap goods from China. We've actually pretty much gone back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Now, the world turns upside down. Nixon takes over, Ford takes over. In the 1980s, Reagan and then Bush take over, and labor share rises. Reagan in the early 1980s wrecks the Air Traffic Controllers Union. The unions are already going into the toilet, and labor share rises. Labor share does well, but then now, I don't pretend to completely explain it, but now we're back down to where we were in the 1950s, late 40s, and 60s. Now,
if I'm looking at from 2000 to 2005, it looks like it's...
What year? I'm sorry, 2025?
If I'm looking at from, it looks like 2020 to 2025, so the last 5 years. So now we're back down.
Well, it's okay. Well, it's down, but now look at the dip in the early 1950s. Further down, look at
right, but
this dip here.
I guess the only similar downturn under the red line would be like 52 to 54. So this looks like it's. I mean, it's a longer stretch of a downturn now.
You mean since the lockdowns?
Yes.
Okay. Well, look, again, all right. I can only tell you, Rob, that these numbers are always, of course, approximations, but I'll go with your magnifying glass. I'm only trying to say that this has been something that has been a complaint ever since 2005 in the 21st century. But if you want to make a point that the numbers, that even though the record low was during the heyday of the unions in about 1953, that was the record low.
In other words, you're saying 05 to 2025, the last 20 years, basically mimics 40 to 65.
I could have, I guess, look, I take it you buy the point. I was thinking of doing moving averages and so on. I thought that, again, what you have to do is, first of all, recognize that the recessions are aberrational. Amazingly, there was a bigger spike in the numbers during these recessions than here, and even though this was the mother of all recessions. So I don't know about that. I'm only looking at the growth areas. I'm only saying that we're higher than lows. We're practically similar to this low. We're much higher than this low, and then the period here and even the period here, you really have to. All that Bridgman said is that we are within our historical range. There's nothing that catches the eye like the previous charts that shows that we are really in the shitter. That's all. We're within the historical range, but I gotta. That's all. But if you want to say that this 5-year period is not as good as this 5-year period, okay.
Right, but it's not a 5-year period.
This low.
If you look at from 1970 till about 2006.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's a pretty large. I mean, in other words, based on this chart, it would be inaccurate to say that people are worse off than they were from 1940 to 1965. But if I wanted to take the range of workers from 1970 to the year
That's
of
right.
2005, they are
That's
worse
right.
off.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This is an argument. I'm trying to remember a New York Times reporter and recently Greg Ip. They all, what he tried to argue with me was, but it's down from 1970. All I tried to point out to him is that read your own New York Times. I told this Times reporter, read all the academic studies. What are they all saying? The reasons for the decline in labor share is due to the huge decline in labor unions, competition from abroad from cheap labor, influx of immigrants, and then they also have something involving
okay, so I get it. So in other words, all of those existed from 1970 to 2005, which were upswings or a better time period. So clearly none of those are the variables that are actually causing workers to take a lower share. So if you do look at it from that perspective, in your opinion, why is it down basically from 2010? I mean, there's an upswing from 50 to 20.
Rob, okay, you're annoying me because I didn't get a chance to finish my point, but you more or less sort of alluded to the point. I wrote this New York Times guy all of the reasons that have been put forward for why there's been a decline since 1970 or since 1980. I just listed them. Unions are mainly, of course, they make a big deal out of labor unions. They make a big deal out of influx of workers abroad, more monopoly, I mean, all kinds of that stuff. So I said, wouldn't a reasonable person, since the data are readily available, want to test those theories against a time that spanned for more than from 1950, for nearly 20 years, from 1947 to 1967, or even 68, 69, wouldn't any curious person, in order to test those explanations, want to ask, well, what happened when none of those things applied? What happened when labor unions were more than 1/3 of the labor force? What happened when there were no high-tech firms that supposed? What happened? Can you let me finish? What happened when there was no huge immigration? It didn't start until the 1970s. What happened when there was no trade with China? What happened when none of those factors applied? In fact, the opposite applied. Labor unions are very powerful. So you want to cut it off at 1970? You're not curious to test the hypotheses, the reasons?
But
you want to arbitrarily eliminate data that we do have that puts those hypotheses to the test?
But I'm not.
Obviously, that's why we want to look at that data, to test the explanations that are being put forward.
Right. But I haven't, you're arguing with someone that's not here. I haven't put forward any of those.
A little louder,
arguments.
Rob.
I said you're arguing with someone that's not here because I didn't put forward any of those arguments.
Well, excuse me. I know you didn't, Rob. You're the guy who asked me what the hell is a deflator. You've asked me certain questions.
I know. A lot of this is new information.
You've got a lot to learn. All I'm trying to tell you is that if you were trying to inform me that you had no information about the standard explanations, that's fine. But I'm only trying to ask you.
No, I'm keeping
why
you in line
not
with the,
look at the full history?
Right,
why not learn from the full history? Why stop it at 19?
So let me ask the question differently.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't this chart go against your initial premise, which is just that labor is as well off as it was previously, and that they're not getting a smaller share? And doesn't this chart show me that since the year 2000, that they are getting a smaller
Since
share.
the year 1980, since the year 1970, they're getting a smaller share. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I thought maybe I'm just reading the chart incorrectly, but from the 1970
because Benjamin Bridgman, not being an arbitrary progressive, does not cut data off just when it contradicts what he likes to see, because he's an open-minded scholar, just like you and I are, Rob. What? Absolutely. What is the basic story? When you actually look at all the data that are available, rather than cutting it off arbitrarily as of a certain date, the basic punchline is fairly simple. If you look at the historical range, beginning when data actually were released in the post-World War II period, starting in 1947, we have gone back to the 1950s and 60s and late mid-60s. That's the main punchline. We're back to a time when labor unions were dominant, when there was no. We've gone back to a time that the left wing celebrates. That's all. Now, if you want me to explain why things got better under Nixon and Reagan and Bush, the answer is, I'm not quite sure, but I will tell you one thing. It's damned embarrassing to the left wing.
Now, if you want,
isn't it? Wouldn't you think? How the hell do things get better under Republicans?
I'm not here to defend the.
I know you're not here to do so, Rob, but you seem to be harping on the point that.
No, I want to ask. I want to ask it.
70. We are.
I want to ask a different question.
All I'm trying to say is that. The first approximation, Rob, but even by an ignorant guy like you, is, don't you want to look at all the data available and not arbitrarily cut it off at a certain date?
I got to argue on that. It seems arbitrary to me to extend the line past 1970. If I can say, hey, I've got a nearly 40-year run where the labor is doing better in this country. And then I've got over the last 20 years, they're doing worse.
Well, that's good, Rob. Now, if you look at this chart, what's your takeaway? Look at this chart, and what's your takeaway?
The current chart I'm looking at?
The chart you're looking at. Tell me your takeaway. What's your takeaway?
Over the last 5 years, labor's doing...
Last 5 years?
Yeah, from 20 to 25.
What's your takeaway about the big decline that basically started in 2005? What's your takeaway?
My takeaway is that since basically the Great Recession, we haven't quite recovered, and labor's basically taking a larger share.
You mean you're so goddamn blind? You're really annoying me. You mean you don't notice that it's quite comparable to where we were in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s? That's not something you managed to notice, and that for some strange reason, things got better during the inflationary periods under Nixon, under the hate labor administration of Reagan. You don't feel you can learn something from actually looking at the data the Bureau of Economic Analysis does make available? You haven't learned anything from that chart, Rob?
The chart
Nothing.
I'm looking at.
All you want to do is keep ignoring the period, the 20-year period from 1947 through 1967. You want to just pretend it doesn't exist?
Well, hold on. Isn't your premise labor is as well is doing? What was your initial premise? That labor was doing just as well, and that we're not capturing a lesser share.
Rob, I guess what we better do in order to recapitulate is to go back to the chart that the Bureau of Labor Statistics released. You want to go back? Could you go back 3 charts, Rob? Because unfortunately, if I'm losing you, I guess I'm losing on. No, the Bureau of Labor Statistics chart. Bureau of Labor Statistics. One more back, Rob.
Okay.
Well, oh God, Rob, you screwed up. Go forward now. No, Rob, you're going.
I'm not sure which chart you're looking for.
Rob, back one.
Back one is this chart.
Yes, okay. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay. What does that chart tell you? The Bureau of Labor Statistics, unlike you, Rob, is actually interested in publishing data from 1947 to the present. Unlike you, they don't want to cut it off arbitrarily. So what does that's from 1947 to the present. What does it tell you about the labor share of non-financial corporations? Tell me what it tells you.
That it's pretty even until the year 2000, and then it goes up. It makes about a halfway recovery.
Doesn't it also tell you, Rob, that if you want to rhapsodize about the days when unions were powerful, when we were able to keep out foreign labor, when we didn't trade with China, when we weren't reckoning manufacturing, labor was getting a much higher share.
But what about like Fed policy and Fed spending? Because that's what
Excuse me?
What about Fed policy and overall government spending? Because that would be the variable that I would more correctly criticize.
I'm not clear on what you're getting at. I'm just asking you to look at this chart and tell me what it says.
I'm getting at that you're putting variables that I wouldn't even mention as being as a drain or criticize the economy.
Rob, excuse me. Then let me limit the statement to the following. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is obviously releasing a chart that shows that starting in 1947 up until the early part of the 21st century, labor share was pretty stable. Starting in 2003, it went down to 50, 75-year lows. Right? That's what the chart tells you, right?
Okay. Now, why did it go down in 2003, in your opinion?
Okay. All right. But that's what that chart tells you. Why? Okay. Now, I will tell you that you're asking a question that I'll have to defer. But I'm trying to address your earlier question, which is, why am I replicating the Bureau of Labor Statistics data that starts in 1947? Because unlike you, they seem to think that they have an obligation to throw up a chart that releases all the data available. After World War II, the government invested hugely in economic data. And so this is the data. Rob, what are you doing to me? Go back to that chart.
I want to ask you a different question.
Oh, my God.
Okay. If you came into this with the feeling that the rich are getting rich and the poor are getting poorer,
yeah,
and that the economy's not doing well for the average American,
yeah,
and you're looking at this and you want to look at the last just 20 years,
yes,
why is that person wrong? And you're arguing, well, because you can go back to the 60s and the chart would look the same.
Yeah, not wrong. The only problem with that is that all I'm trying to do is focus on a myth about a huge category of labor compensation. Now, if I'm going to get into your mishigas, Rob, then I have to say that even though the share is down from 2000, even though the share is down from 1990, that says nothing. It's a share of non-financial corporate income. And it's all it's saying is that labor in those terms is getting screwed. If you want to say that proves that labor is getting paid a lot less, then I have to look at broader numbers. If you're talking about income, then I have to look at much broader numbers.
Okay.
In other words, your share could be down, but that share could still mean that in inflation-adjusted dollars, it's way up. In fact, it is up. So therefore, you seem to be confusing. Instead of focusing on what is a myth that's being perpetrated, labor is getting screwed historically. If you want to say that, let me echo your point. But oh, excuse me. I will echo your point in a moment, but I just want to say that you seem to think that every chart has got to get back to your Michigas. If you want to ask a different question, which is that what is the distribution of income? And income not only includes compensation in non-financial corporations, it includes compensation in financial corporations, it includes compensation in nonprofits, it includes compensation in businesses, it includes compensation in government. Many, many categories not included in this chart. It also includes investment income, retirement income. It also includes welfare payments. It includes a whole set of, and then you have to inflation, it includes about 9 different categories that are not being represented here. But all I did was try to latch upon a major myth. The major myth is that perpetrated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that from starting in 2005, we've hit 75-year lows in compensation. But if you want to interpret this to mean that labor in terms of its actual income is getting screwed, or excuse me, I'll go back to your Michigas. In terms of its share, is labor getting screwed compared to the Reagan years? Yes. Okay. In terms of this chart,
all right.
yeah.
You're not going to like this.
If that's the only point you want to make, Rob, fine. I'm only trying to educate you. I'm only trying to educate you on the fact that that reasonable people actually look at the full data,
right?
And they look at the Bureau
of Labor Statistics data. But I got to contradict that. If you were trying to sell this argument and you're telling people we're at a 75-year low, and it's also beneath a time period from 1970 to 2010 that was substantially above this.
Yeah, that's right.
Which of those two arguments sounds more convincing? Hey, we're at a 75-year low, and the entire stretch of time from 1970 to 2010 was above this, versus, oh, but if you extend it back and you include the 40 to 60s, the 40s and 60s were also low as well.
Okay, I guess this is the wall that I'm meeting, Rob. You choose to use your ignorance as an argumentative weapon.
Fair enough.
Why are you doing that? I can write a New York Times reporter and convince him that given all the explanations for the decline, especially the decline in labor unions were 1/3 of the economy. Now they're less than 6%. Given all the explanations for the decline, since 1970.
It should apply to 1960 as well. And so all of your stated reasons are inaccurate. That's what you're saying.
Now, you're using your ignorance as a weapon because you keep telling me, well, I never heard those explanations anyway, so I don't give a damn. Okay, fine.
No, I'm saying that I'm saying your original thesis was not, hey, the left is wrong in their stated reason for why labor is down.
Excuse me, Rob.
Labor's not down.
Rob, let me go back to what I said. I threw up I started with the official chart, which was shown again of the Bureau of Labor Statistics chart of the labor share of non-financial corporations. All I'm saying, Rob, is that this is the official number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It says that we are in the shitter compared to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, starting in 2005. So all I used as my foil was the official numbers from an official source that everybody feels has got to be right. So that's all I did. But if you are unimpressed by the fact that everybody, New York Times and all the rest of them, keep claiming that this is true because the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's true. If you don't care, okay. But all I did was set it up by citing the numbers that I said were bullshit. I said the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers are bullshit. I didn't say anything else was bullshit.
Can we agree on this? These are two different claims.
Excuse me?
Let's agree, or maybe we won't, that these are two different claims. There's one claim of it's inaccurate to think that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And it's a different claim to say when the New York Times says that the reason why people are getting poorer and they attribute it to foreign goods coming in.
A reason why.
And you can state 7 reasons there. That's a different claim than just the broader claim of that it's inaccurate to say that in other words, the B claim, you could have all of the reasons that the New York Times stated is wrong, but it could still be true that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So to disprove, their reasons,
Rob, that's what I keep telling you. Rob, may I repeat? You are annoying me. In order to calculate what the rich are getting, you have to take all of their after-tax
Does this chart
income.
prove? So then,
right?
okay. This specific chart.
You're not going to let me finish the sentence, Rob. I'm just saying that again, Rob. I don't understand why you don't grasp that. There are 9 other factors
let me ask you this.
Your statement that are not on this chart. That's why the rich are not getting richer.
Simplicity.
You asked me that question in the beginning, and now you're asking me again.
Is this chart not meant to prove that the rich are getting richer? I mean, not here to debunk that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer?
Obviously, they're just one part of a 9-part story, and therefore, even in terms of share, it's not the way you'd measure it. So therefore, I never made any such claim, and right from the start, I keep telling you that in terms of the actual numbers, which I could send you, the rich in terms of after-tax income, including, of course, vastly investment income, and the poor in terms of welfare, and the middle, that no such thing has been happening. But of course, that's due to factors that this chart has basically nothing to do with, because it's only talking about, in other words, if you get 75% of a share, that's double what it was in the year 2000, then that's a lot better than getting 85% of that share, right? So therefore, it's not relevant. So you keep changing the subject to a broader issue that I'm not trying to address. But if you want to know the answer, I can only tell you that I happen to know that you're mistaken. The rich are not getting richer.
Fine. So now I have clarity. This chart is not addressing that question, which is the question that we started with.
How could it possibly address that question? It's just
what I've been asking for 10 minutes, so we're on the same page.
Excuse me. Rob, when you asked me first about the rich getting richer, I listed all the factors, and I told you that I'm only going to be focusing on one aspect of wages. I listed all the factors that determine that. And obviously, the rich getting richer in relation to the poor, you've got to include welfare payments. I told you, for example, specifically, that the Census Bureau does not include food stamps. So I thought we already managed that. We already set the stage for that. But go ahead.
No, you're right, and I'm wrong, and I appreciate the clarification.
Okay, but Rob, if you don't find this interesting, I respect that. All I'm trying to say is that, again, to give your annoying questions due, to give the devil his due, we actually have a chart that would be a complete embarrassment to the left wing. They love the Bureau of Labor Statistics chart, which I began with. That was the only chart that I said is fraudulent. And then I quoted Bridgman of BEA, who suggested that it probably is fraudulent. That chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, labor was getting paid, getting a much larger share than they have been since 2005. So I began with that chart, which everybody loves. The non-financial corporations are screwing them. Now, again, as we might say, well, they might be getting screwed by the non-financial corporations, but then again, we haven't factored in so many other things about what they're really earning, but that's a digression. Now, all I'm saying here is that the accurate chart is a complete embarrassment to the left wing. And of course, again, just one simple punchline. They constantly claim, when they look at productivity numbers, which you went over, when they look at labor share, which we're now going over, that the whole problem has been that unions used to be strong in the great old days of the 50s and 60s, and now unions are very weak. We got to bring back the unions. So that's probably a left-wing mantra that even an ignorant guy like you has heard remotely. You know that the private sector unions have really collapsed. Maybe you didn't know it was from 35% down to less than 6%, and you didn't know, presumably, that the left wing keeps saying we got to bring back the unions, and that's the whole reason why when you can take various pictures of the productivity pay gap and of the share gap, and you find that it's because the unions are in the shitter. But therefore, all I'm saying is that this turns the world upside down for the left wing. Things are back to where they were when the unions were strong, and when the unions got weaker under Nixon and Reagan, labor share rose. That's all. Now, if you want, no, just a moment, but let's get back to the Rob Bernstein point. Greg Ip threw up a chart, and I guess you love Greg Ip, and the left wingers loved it. Robert Reich got on it. You know, this is the Wall Street Journal publishing, and of course, boy, did they love it, because this comes from the capitalist rag, the Wall Street Journal. Greg Ip used charts starting in 1980. He didn't want to mess with 1970. Because look at 1980, it's really high, right? During the recession. So so he used a slightly different kind of related calculation, but he started in 1980. So that really shows a decline. And you'll love it, Rob. You'll say, hey, look, yeah, he's right. You know, and the left wing loved it. You know, obviously that's exactly when Reagan wrecked the air traffic controllers and really helped to break the back of the labor unions. So they love it. That's what Greg Ip did, and that came from the Wall Street Journal. So you're an ass kisser of the left wing, Rob. Make your peace with it.
I hope that's the audience's conclusion.
Well, all I'm trying to say, Rob, is that, again, well, I needn't belabor the point. Anybody who'd be interested would want to know what happened when labor unions were really powerful. Well, it looks like we've gone back to the 1950s and 60s. But if that doesn't interest you, Rob, okay. I hope it interests your audience. But maybe we should go on to the next chart. But perhaps it doesn't even matter. You might want to know why you get such a different result when you do, and why you should adjust for depreciation and taxes on production. Why you get such a different story when you adjust for that. If you recall, I don't want you to go back to that chart, but if you recall, we're high 47 to the, and then 2005 when the shitter, and it looks as though finally the decline in labor unions really begins to bite starting in 2005, because we're doing so much worse than we were in the 50s and 60s when the labor unions was powerful.
That the modern conversation about
Excuse me?
Do you find that the modern conversation about...
In what conversation?
The modern conversation.
The modern conversation?
Yeah, like the conversation this year addressing wage or labor is mainly a conversation in regards to unions?
Rob, yes.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know.
It's not what I'm seeing and reading as the complaints. I see mostly right-wing complaints.
You don't read the left-wingers? Obviously,
I mean, I guess I'm not on left-wing blogs, but I'm reading the newspaper.
I'm sorry, Rob. When I say yes, I'm only trying to tell you that it frequently comes up. Do you ever read Robert Reich? He's got 1.5 million followers on Twitter. I guess that's why he's such an ignoramus, Rob. He's got 1.5 million followers on Twitter, and he mentions unions.
Listen. Before you attack me in this way, if there's one thing I'm actually not an ignoramus on,
I'm sorry, Rob.
It's having a fairly good finger on the pulse of the general news cycle and even the general sentiment of the public. And
the public,
yes.
Okay.
And if I were to digest the information and the conversation of the complaints when it comes to people having a feeling like they're in a worse situation now, and I'm not of this opinion, but if I were to adjust the information I'm taking in, I see very little conversation about unions. I do see people, and I think they're wrong, who are concerned with both immigrant labor and are concerned with cheaper goods that come from other countries. If we were to rate these complaints, do you find that when you're typically digesting news and information, you're finding that most of the conversation is we need unions in order to restore the labor wages of the masses? That's not what I'm seeing or hearing. That might have been true 10 years ago.
Thank you, Rob.
That's not what I hear today.
I'm sorry, Rob. I got annoyed. I take it back. I'm not calling you an ignoramus. Please accept my apology. Just a crusty old guy, and maybe my bladder is getting full. I withdraw this statement. I want to elaborate a little bit further. Obviously, you're right that in terms of like surveys, I mean, let me backtrack and say what I really mean is that the Economic Policy Institute, the people who influence the New York Times, I guess I should have thrown up a few articles about the explanation for the supposed decline, and you'll find that the decline in labor unions gets prominent mention in the New York Times. So I guess what I'm talking about is the influential media does always mention unions. But now get to your other points. You said that the common complaint is immigrant labor and cheap goods from abroad. Now look, and indeed, I said that's part of the story. Now look at 2005. That's when the shit really hit the fan, right? Or 2004. So fine. Now look at the 22 years from 47 to 67. Where was immigrant labor in those 20 years from 47 to 67? And where was cheap goods from abroad? The fact of the matter is they were basically negligible. Both of those factors. The immigrant labor didn't start coming into the country. There was the 1965 legislation, and then it wasn't until the 1980s. But by 2005, the share of foreign-born workers in the economy was hitting records not seen since 1910. The trade with China ratcheted up starting in the year 2000 and was going great guns by 2005. Trade with abroad. So all of those factors are prevalent. Now, what we find is that you really have to scratch hard to see any great difference in labor share at a time when immigrant labor and cheap goods from abroad were negligible versus when they're dominant, when they're important. So those explanations fall apart. They don't. If they're valid, they should have been valid in the 40s. They should have. Well, how come we're doing just as well as we did in the 50s and 60s when those were not a factor? That's all. An open-minded person would say. Well, they can't be explanations. If they were explanations, then we should be doing a lot worse than we were in the 50s and 60s. But we're not.
With general technological development.
Excuse me?
With general technological development, everything else being equal, would you anticipate that labor should be able to make more money in 100 years in the future than they are now? If
I got you, Rob. Again, you're misunderstanding the data. Again, they are, Rob. I'm talking, Rob. This is about the Bureau of Labor Statistics share of greatly rising income. This is a ratio. It's a share of greatly rising income. And now you
I get it. So it doesn't matter if it's overall.
All I said was,
got you.
all I tried to do was latch upon your story and say that the way to put it to the test, that if it's valid, it should mean that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is right. We're in the shitter because in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have immigrants. The immigrants didn't start. The flood of immigrants really started in the 80s, but there was a huge flood by 2005. Huge number of foreign-born workers in the U.S., illegals all over the place. Trade with China, huge increase, starting when they joined the WTO. So it should put us in the shitter in terms of ratio. But now you keep changing the subject. I guess what I should do now is resort to a chart that actually addresses the question you're trying to ask. This is a share. Rob, just a moment before you do this. Rob, I don't understand why it's difficult for you to understand that. This is a share of hugely rising income on the part of the non-financial corporations. But the same thing with productivity. I wasn't when you asked the question, but is it all inflation? I said no. We know that productivity has risen, so we know that corporations are making far more income than ever before, and so this ratio doesn't address that. It's actually, as I say, if we looked it up, it's probably better to be 75% of corporate income in 2025 than to be nearly 85% in 1992. You're probably a lot richer then because we're talking about a share. If income doubled from here to here, then obviously it's better to be here in terms of actually. But we're talking about something that's important to the left wing and indeed important to me. How are they doing in terms of share? Their share should be in the shitter precisely because of what you just said. The huge amount of imports of cheap goods from cheap labor in China and elsewhere, and the huge number of immigrants working. But they're not. It's not. We tested in the night. We should be in the shitter compared to the 1950s and 60s, and we're not. Therefore, the share argument, which their share should be much lower. That's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says, but it's not. And so therefore, those explanations fall apart. Now, I could also add that real wages and salaries are higher than they were in 2019. But by the way, if you want to now digress into other issues, of course, I would tell you that progress since 2019 has been pretty sluggish. The progress has been there, but it's hardly going great guns due to a whole lot of other factors, which, by the way, I don't think it has much to do with immigrants or much to do with cheap, because, by the way, it's the Walmart effect, Amazon effect. All those cheap goods are reducing costs to the lower half of the population. They're the ones who go to Walmart. The vast majority of people who buy from Amazon, the cheap goods from abroad. The immigrant labor I think is enriching us, but that's a different matter. I think it's due to some of the things that you like to stress, which is like the actions of the Federal Reserve, the actions of Trump, all the other crap that's come from the federal government. I don't think that those two explanations you gave me are the reasons why progress has been disappointingly sluggish. But I will say, we are doing, for the most part, a little better than 2019, except for housing. But of course, why are we in the shitter because of housing? It's because the Federal Reserve has hiked interest rates and the mortgage interest rate is high because the government interferes with building of housing. And all those reasons that we can list. So that's a story for another day.
All right.
But all I'm trying to tell you is that if you are going to repeat those points, then they don't apply to labor share, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics data imply that they do. Those points about cheap labor, but that's all.
I'm on board. I got too argumentative on that slide, and we got a bunch to cover.
That's okay, Rob. Look, Rob, sometimes you annoy me. I still love and admire you. I want you to know that. And just as Bob Murphy says, God, anyway. All right. I thought this would be an interesting story in itself. In other words, why did Benjamin Bridgman feel that we have to subtract depreciation from the income of corporations in order to get a correct denominator? Now, this is a definition. Now, I tried to point out that I'm behaving according to Bureau of Economic Analysis standards, unlike those Harvard economists who ignore them, or the BLS. This is number 7. Now, what is consumption of fixed capital? Depreciation. The charge for the using up of private and government fixed capital located in the United States. It is the decline in the value of the stock of fixed assets due to wear and tear, obsolescence, accidental damage, and aging. Now go to the next chart. Oh, okay. Yeah, then I defined it. Taxes on production and imports. Federal excise taxes and customs duties. In other words, taxes on production. That's why Bridgman, in other words, it's not taxes on after-tax income. It's taxes that at the point of production. So that for every dollar of output, you've got to pay an immediate tax to the government, on production and imports in terms of tariffs as well. So let's go to the next chart because that's the big news. All right. Okay. So that's gross value added of non-financial corporations versus net value added. And I thought I included there that the difference between gross value added and net value added is depreciation. That's what's netted out, depreciation. Now, why do they have a figure on net value added? Now, all that shows is that the gross value added, which is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses as their denominator, has been rising much faster than net value added, which is much closer to what I've been using as my denominator. And the difference is the increase in the share due to depreciation. But let's go to the next chart. Okay. Well, I had a label for that, Rob, but okay. That's a percentage.
I can track down the label if you
Oh, it's okay. I'm going to explain it, Rob. I'm here to explain it. I know what it is. That's depreciation as a share of gross value added for non-financial corporations. The charge for depreciation of your capital assets. Notice, I'm not even sure why it spikes in the recession, some of the recessions, but notice that it was in the late 1940s, it was 7.5%, and now it's doubled to more than 15%. Depreciation. Now, what is that all about? Something that might interest you, Rob. Why is that happening? Because
cheaper items.
Businesses are investing in capital assets like software, equipment, rather than in structures that depreciate much faster than what they used to invest in. Structures intensive, basically very little in the way of software, huge amount of software investment. Software depreciates very quickly. And so this is probably a point you should be able to anticipate, Rob. The whole point is that if you don't make allowance, let's say that no companies ever set money aside for depreciation to restore their assets to where they were because they're wearing down. If the economy didn't do that, didn't set aside money to shore up our capital assets that are depreciating, we'd eventually all starve. that you have to, that no company can really count in terms of its income what it cost in terms of the depreciation of its capital in order to produce its output. So that's why net value added after depreciation is what matters. And because net value added has been increasing much more slowly than gross value added, that's the reason why that denominator, what business has left over in order to pay their workers, is less, because no business can count as income anything but net value added. Every business has got to, because if that business didn't spend money on shoring up its capital assets, it would disappear.
And was this one of the variables that they were leaving out when they were putting out their bullshit charts to say?
That's right. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is completely ignoring what Benjamin Bridgman and what I, even before him, are trying to remind people about. You can't, if depreciation and production taxes were a stable percentage, then your trend wouldn't change. But when depreciation as a share more than doubles, then you have to use a net figure rather than a gross figure, because the gross figure is misleading.
That's interesting.
The net figure.
In other words, it's loony talk to say corporations are making more if you're not looking at deflation, because investments expire.
Talk a little more slowly, Rob, a little louder. What'd you say? What'd you say?
No. This is, in other words, it's highly fraudulent to pretend like businesses are doing better if you're not accounting for deflation, because there's significantly more deflation in this environment.
Deflation? Oh, you mean inflation? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I'm sorry.
Depreciation?
Depreciation, yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I follow this one.
Well, right.
That's not reflecting for depreciation.
That's why this might especially interest you. Let's go to the next part. I think maybe this is going to be too lengthy, but go to the next part. This is from Bridgman. Taxes and depreciation accrue to neither labor or capital. So that's what he's saying. That if they were constant, using gross and net returns will tell the same story. But they're not constant. Computers, technology, given the increasing output net of depreciation, is a more important measure. Using net production only includes output which can be used for current consumption or expanding future production. So that was his point. You've got to use the net figure. But let's get to the next chart, which might interest you as well, which is, net domestic product rather than gross domestic product, because the broader point applies. The market value of the goods and services produced by labor and property, less the value of the fixed capital used in production. Gross domestic product, less consumption of fixed capital, depreciation. Net domestic product may be viewed as an estimate of sustainable product, which is a rough measure of the level of consumption that can be maintained while leaving capital assets intact. So you're on board with that. You're saying that again, net domestic product is really the bottom line measure. It's what's sustainable, because you need to leave your capital assets intact. You need to shore up your depreciated capital. Otherwise, you're going to starve. And now let's go to the next chart, which might interest you, which is an interesting scandal. Real gross domestic product versus net domestic product. You see, again, that's the gap in depreciation. So that this might interest you. In very short-term analysis, probably the variation between net and gross is not going to be huge. But in terms of the long-term growth, if you're going to buy gross domestic product as any kind of measure of long-term growth, then you're being dishonest if you use gross domestic product. precisely because depreciation has taken such a bigger bite out of gross domestic product, you have to use net. So that might interest you as a side point, that's also one of the scandals. Maybe I'm exaggerating. One of the embarrassing things that they ignore, which is that they don't look at depreciation, they don't look it up, and they'll report the long-term growth in gross domestic. In other words, if I'm going to take the growth in gross domestic product from 1990 to the present, or from 2000 to the present, I'm going to be dishonest if I use gross. I've got to use net, and I'm going to get a difference in the growth rate, and the growth rate of net is the real story. And of course,
that's got to be really interesting for if you're looking at debt.
Sorry. Repeat.
That's got to be really interesting if you're looking at government spending as a percentage of GDP. And then you're also saying that in the modern age, GDP is a bad tool because there's more deflation of assets now than there was historically.
Depreciation of it.
Depreciation. I'm sorry. I keep.
Well, actually, no. I'll tell you one thing, Rob. I do release. I can get numbers on private sector GDP, and by the way, private sector GDP even excludes the private sector defense industries because government portion of GDP involves the defense industries. So therefore, I could do net domestic product private sector. But all I'm saying is that, back to the point you seem to be underlining in my case, where a brilliant guy like you and a brilliant guy like me are on the same page, is to say that part of the reason why, and this is inflation adjusted, but I just had to include the whole enchilada in order to make the point, but the general point about depreciation. But part of the reason why the story has been sluggish in the 21st century is because net domestic product has been lagging. It's kind of interestingly enough, it's kind of a mixed. It makes software and equipment and all the rest of that stuff and AI a kind of a mixed blessing, you might say. Because recognize that if you're going to invest in assets that depreciate very quickly, then it's going to cost you. You've got to set aside money more than ever to replace those assets than corporations had to in the past when they built assets that lasted longer. On the other hand, this isn't to say you shouldn't invest in software. You should just face the reality that the net figure is really what matters now, not the gross figure. If you're going to look at any period of 10 to 20 years or more in history. And so that's, I finally gotten you pleased with what I'm saying, Rob. So maybe, but that's the story there. So anyway, what I'm saying is that, okay, look, we've gone over this before. Again, it's only that all that Bridgman and I are saying is that you've got to use a net figure. The net figure with production taxes tells a very different story about labor share, and labor, and the decline in labor share can't be due to what people are complaining about, immigrants and imports from abroad, because back in the 1950s and 60s, we should have been doing much better because we didn't have those problems. We had those problems now, and yet we're doing the same as we did then. However, that's all I wanted to say. And maybe we could go on to the next, because probably, oh my God, it's 4:40. So what's the next one? Oh my God. What the hell is this one? Oh my God. Oh, okay. You didn't provide the labels, but I know what the hell it is. My apologies. That's okay. Just a little bit of a story about the other thing. Maybe you don't see it, but it certainly comes all the time from a lot of sources. This is pre-tax. I'm sorry. Let me start that again. After tax. This is after-tax corporate profits in the non-financial corporate sector. Again, better to exclude the financial sector, as a share of gross income. That's what they usually throw up. And I'm sorry. What the hell? Percentage of that? 14%. Oh, yeah, of course. Good God. Got me a little confused, Rob. I blame you. Okay. Profits. Robert Reich says those corporate pigs are profiting like you wouldn't believe. Look at the trend in corporate profits as a share of corporate income compared to the late 1940s. Look at it. It's way up. Those pigs are benefiting like you wouldn't believe. Interestingly enough, it was, of course, ironically, it was even lower in the 1980s under Reagan, which is also kind of funny, but it's certainly a lot higher than it was in the 50s and 60s. So it's been hovering at record highs in the post-World War II period. After-tax profits, and in this case, I took the handy non-financial corporations because I think that works better because the financial corporations kind of distort the trend. Okay, so that's what Robert Reich and all the left-wingers will tell you. After-tax profits. So what I point out, although I wonder if I'm going to get guff from you, is when I see that number, I will say, you know what that's all due to? Taxes on corporate profits have greatly declined. Now, shift to the next chart. Okay, there I've taken the same denominator and I've taken pre-tax profits. Now, once again, you might say it's kind of funny. Back to the 1960s, pre-tax profits as a share of gross value added are up, but
are profits? Are we looking at this from like an inflation perspective?
Because no. But again,
but wouldn't that also just answer for the story?
Okay,
because
Rob,
if you want, yeah,
just a moment. Let me try to teach you something.
Sure.
Whenever you're doing a ratio between a nominal and a nominal, you got a real. In other words, these are ratios. So if I wanted to do inflation,
so it's a ratio of it up.
Excuse me?
So it's a ratio of corporate profits being up.
It's a percentage, Rob, as a percentage of the gross value added of non-financial corporations.
Got it.
So therefore, now go back to the earlier one. What Reich likes to point to is the earlier one. That too is a percentage.
Got
it. Everything's doing better in terms of inflation, but anyway, that's a ratio. So he's saying that those pigs, out of their income, they're taking a record share. But all I'm saying is that on a pre-tax basis, they're not. Again, if you want to say that they're certainly taking higher shares than they were starting in 1970, that's true. But the strange and embarrassing part of it, again, is that they're doing about as well as they did in the 50s and 60s. It's back to the 50s and 60s. And during the Reagan years, they were doing a lot worse. So it turns the left-wing story on its head. That's all. But again, if you want to return to your mantra, profits are up since 1970, quite right.
All right.
But at least if you actually take profits properly measured, pre-tax, then you find a very different pattern from what Reich and the other left-wingers like to show. That's all. But again, you seem to object to my comparing this with the 50s and 60s. I like to say that, but those are the years that you left-wingers say were the great times when unions when corporations had to behave because unions had them controlled. When labor was more organized, or when a single-family householder could support a family of four. All the great old days, and yet the greed of corporations is about what it was in the 50s and 60s. Despite unions, they were doing about as well, if not better. Of course, in every recession, you'll notice profits tank. But now, so that's true. But I'm only saying that let's be accurate and say at least that we get a very anomalous pattern. Profits are doing no better than the 50s and 60s, although they're doing better than the 70s into the present. And if you want to make a thing out of that, that's fine. I'm only saying that since you yourself said that it's because of those damned immigrants and because of all the imports that corporations are really making out, and they're more greedy, then I can only say that, oddly enough, when we didn't have imports to speak of, nothing happening in that regard in the 50s and 60s, they did just as well.
What if you want to say that the culprit's government spending?
Excuse me?
What if you wanted to say that the culprit was government spending and government debt?
Well, culprit is government spending and government debt. Well, I don't think that. I mean, my analysis of government spending and government debt is, of course, the main reason why that net domestic product has been rising. The more honest measure of even the government's own measure of the increase in output, why it's been so sluggish, why we're barely doing much better than 2019. So indeed, it's part of the reason for it. The overhang of government. I mean, look, the big story for me is, of course, the lockdowns of 2000 brought trillions of dollars worth of debt that the government couldn't sell. They needed to monetize it. The Federal Reserve bought up trillions of government debt because it had to. It flooded the economy with more money. And then we got price inflation that wrecked everybody. So the disaster of government, starting from the lockdowns of 2000, I could show you the chart. Trillions, nearly more than $3.5 trillion in government debt suddenly in 2 years. The Federal Reserve acquires that trillion. M2, the money supply, shoots up. The price inflation shoots up about 12 months later. According to the usual timing of such things, the markets are completely roiled. So, and then we have to crawl out of that major blow to the private sector that couldn't have happened. The government couldn't have gotten away with it if they didn't have the Federal Reserve monetizing all that debt. They couldn't have sold that debt. Had they tried to sell trillions of dollars worth of debt within about 12 months to the private sector, the interest rate would have shot up to 10, 12%. But the Federal Reserve took it all. And then the Federal Reserve took it and of course did it with printed money. The printed money exploded into the economy and price inflation resulted. And so indeed, you want to talk about the disaster. And then now we've been very slowly crawling up from that chasm. So I would maintain that 5 years later, we're doing a little better than 2019, but not that much better.
Could you?
So that story probably interests you more than the stories I've been telling. But go ahead.
Could you put forward then that
Yeah.
government policy has
Yeah.
left the American worker with the lowest ratio of wages since 1970?
Well, the reason I have trouble explaining it is that it started in 2004, 2005. And so I you've located a great lacuna in my understanding. I only know what hypotheses to reject, the standard ones that have been put forward. But why we went back to labor share being similar to the late 40s, 50s, and 60s is a bit of a mystery to me. Because I don't think that you can that I think that it's simply intellectually ridiculous to say that factors that you can cite that are present now when not at all present during an earlier period, they're not at all present during an earlier period, and we're doing just as well or badly as we did then as we're doing now. That's why I think the 50s and 60s are relevant. However, if you ask me why we did so much better in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, most of which is an embarrassment to the left wing, because Nixon and Ford and Reagan and Bush were in charge for so much of that period, why profits rates were lower, why wage shares were higher. I don't know if I can explain that either.
Can't you just point to government financial policy
that
has essentially made cheap capital available to the wealthy that's not available to the poor?
And just a moment. Again, let me repeat. We were at a certain level in terms of profits and in terms of labor share from 1947 to 1967, 68. Then then Nixon takes over, followed by Ford, followed by Carter for 4 years, and then Reagan for 8 years, Bush for 4 years. All of that period, the 70s and the 80s, we get very worrisome price inflation, bad news, and yet profits fall, the profit rate falls in the 70s and 80s, and labor share rises. So why, and that's 2 decades, 20 years. Actually, more than that, what Bush, because Bush was in power through 92. Reagan came into power in 1980. Nixon was in power from 1968 with Ford for another 8 years, 76. So basically, all those Republicans who hate unions, who hate workers, the workers are doing better under their administrations, and profits are doing worse. As measured properly in terms of profit rates and labor share, ratios that matter. I can't make sense out of that. I think neither can you. Because a lot of shit happens. We go off the gold standard. Price inflation takes off. The fucking Republicans are in charge. Reagan breaks the back of the union. And then starting in the year 2000, or actually starting in the 90s, we start getting a huge influx of cheap goods from abroad. Hits really hard in 2000 with China joining the WTO. By the 1990s, there are more foreign-born workers in the country that matching the records of 1910. So everything gets turned upside down in terms of our explanations. So, but if you want me to be able to understand why government is part of the solution and part of the problem, why the Federal Reserve is part of the I misspoke. Why government is part of the problem and not part of the solution, and why the Federal Reserve is part of the problem and not part of the solution. I can answer a lot of those questions. But ironically, the price inflation of the 1970s was sparked by a Federal Reserve-induced spike in the money supply. My data also show that. Just as Milton Friedman said, price inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, and it comes from the Federal Reserve. That price inflation that was driving the mortgage interest rates to 22%, that was really causing problems. Despite that, the partial explanations for why corporations might have gotten hit in the 70s. We could elaborate a little bit. But all I'm saying is that there's plenty to complain about plenty of reasons why we should abolish the Fed, plenty of reasons why we should roll back government to at least only maybe 10% of what it actually spends. Plenty of good reasons for that. But the stories that I'm telling, very difficult to make the connection, given all the anomalies in the patterns. Why did profits go in the shitter in 70s and 80s? Why did wage shares rise in the 70s and 80s when they weren't supposed to? Why is the left-wing narrative completely turned on its head? Based on the data, the best friend of labor in terms of share of the income was Ronald Reagan. Amazing. And even Nixon. So that's crazy, right?
Agreed.
So that's why I'm saying that. You're asking good questions, and I'm prepared to answer them. I tried to go into the basic disaster, of course, of course, I can also explain, Rob, if you ever had any time, on why the government caused the worst recession since the Great Depression. I can also explain that the economy has performed worse since World War II under the Federal Reserve than it did from 1870 to 1913, the 43 years for which we have records before the Federal Reserve was created. So I can explain a lot. I mean, I'm saying a before and after the Federal Reserve shows that according to every criterion, even forgiving it, the Great Depression, which happened 16 years after the Federal Reserve was created, we've had a worse performing economy by every metric since World War II under the supervision of the Federal Reserve. And it's a myth that the economy was worse from 1870 to 1913 over those 43 years, according to every measure, even though there was certainly a lot to be desired. But the economy was not worse in most ways. It was a little better than since the Federal Reserve was better than since the Federal Reserve was created. So I'm beginning to elaborate on things that you are interested rather than the very boring stuff I've had you go over.
This was.
So I apologize for all that, Rob.
No.
You jumped. I had a final slide. Jump past 22 and go to 23 for a moment. I don't care about 22 is just beating a dead horse. Go to 23. I'm trying to remember why I put that in. 23. No. The next one, Rob. The final.
No, I think this.
No. I gave you a chart 23, Rob.
This is chart.
You
chart
didn't
23.
use it. Okay. It's okay. Forget it, Rob.
Okay. I can go into my email and grab a different one if there was a different one.
Doesn't matter, Rob. Look, I've taken up 3 hours of your time.
Gene, this was fantastic. What should I call the episode? The workers are just fine, or what do you like as a title?
Rob Bernstein keeps annoying Gene.
Okay, we can go with that. No, I'll just abridge it.
Economic data.
I'll abridge it. Rob annoys Gene Part 6. That's what I'll call it.
Mainstream myths about labor.
No, let's go. Rob annoys Gene. I like Rob annoys
labor, Gene. Income, and profit rates. Mainstream myths about labor, income, and profit rates, even though, because labor share would be a little bit too much of a confusion there. And you, of course, would say, well, if you're measuring labor income, but of course, I was measuring labor share. Mainstream myth about labor share and profit rates. Mainstream myths, not just left-wing myths, because if the New York Times is mainstream, I can assure you they believe it. If the Wall Street Journal is mainstream, I assure you they believe it. So it's mainstream myths about labor share and profit rates.
Got it. All right. Gene, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving us the education. And we'll do it again down the line.
Bring the porch tour to Manhattan, Rob.
There you go.
So that a cripple like me can actually
I've been
enjoy.
Telling you,
what?
Let's do one in your living room.
Okay. That's a good idea, Rob. And keep up the good work about the only thing I want repressed, Rob, if anything in the files shows that Jeffrey is one of my distant relatives, I want that suppressed.
I
don't want that coming to light, Rob.
I'll talk to the others on the Jewish committee and we'll get it done.
Anything else is okay. I take a prurient interest. And of course, you guys are right that they're criminals. They're still, the record is not complete. There might well be criminals we've got to find. It's amazing. It's amazing that Alex Berenson and all the rest of them are calling a halt to the investigation. They are more ridiculous even than the people who've been presenting the data that I've exposed as fraudulent. So you keep up the much better work that you are doing with Dave, Rob, and I'll finally shut up and say goodbye, say good night and goodbye.
All right. You're the man.